Philly Willie, what's happening?
Hey, Ona, how you doing? Hey, everybody, what's cracking
I'm doing
on
good.
a
I'm
Wednesday
doing good.
night?
I'm doing good. Hey, everybody there on Instagram. You know, I can't wave at you in case you've just joined us for the first time because the camera's behind me. But here's the wave. Here's the wave at all of you. Hey, baby love. How's your week going?
Very busy, very busy. I just got home. I'm still doing the Upshaws, so I'm doing another episode this week. And it's
Awesome.
fabulous, magical, funny, hilarious. I love working with those people a lot. They've been leaning into me, and I'm really, really, really grateful. I love working with Mike Epps. He and I do good comedy together.
Oh, I
And
bet. I
I
bet.
have always loved working with Wanda Sykes. She's just such a brilliant mind, actually. And like I've said before, Regina Hicks, who's the show's creator and showrunner, Kim Fields, Wanda Sykes. I mean, there's such beautiful female energy around, and it keeps everything like popping and flowing, and I just love it. So that was wonderful. And then I had a couple of really interesting experiences last week. I was at the Hollywood Museum where they are having a Black History Month exhibit, and you guys got to see it. It's fabulous. And they have one of our dad's suits from Mission Impossible on display, and then they have one of my suits on display from Seinfeld. So they're right next to each other. I think I did a
Oh.
post on it. Matter of fact, I know I did. So you can check out my Instagram and see a post and see some of the pictures from that. That was fabulous, to be able to talk about Dad and the influence he had on us. And Black
Mhm.
history was in our household. We grew up with it. It wasn't a month; it was our lives, and it was great to share that with them. And then the next day, I was honored by a man named Don Hahn, who is the head. I mean, I don't know if he's the head animator at Disney anymore, but he's like the animator emeritus. Don Hahn has done Beauty and the Beast, Hercules, Atlantis, the movie that I did, and so many
Mm.
other amazing Disney projects. And they're doing a documentary, and I don't want to mention what it is yet, but I was on the Disney lot and being able to talk about the documentary and the people I've worked with and the experience on Atlantis. And I'll ask Don if I can mention it because it's really very very special and it falls right in line with Black History Month and what we're all
Mm.
about. And again, I was honored and to be able to speak to people from my experience, from our background, from our ground of being is it's great for us, but it's truly unique for them. They're hearing things they haven't thought about before because a lot of the people that are organizing these particular events are not people of color. And so, even though their hearts are big and they have such a great outreach, the experiences that they have are limited. So, it takes us to share our experiences with them so that
Mhm.
there's a bridge that's built in understanding and real connectivity as opposed to just intellectualizing the situation for people of color, minorities, disadvantaged communities. So, we need to get out there and share so that people understand who we are and what we go through. And I said something to them. I don't know if I said it here. Maybe I did to precursor what I was going to say there, but I said to them that every black child, at least we were told, that we were going to have to be at least twice as good to get
Mm.
have a chance. You know,
Mhm.
um, and so that's been a big phrase of mine lately. And I said to them, if you're looking at these exhibits and you're seeing things that you appreciate, that you resonate with, you appreciate the artistry, you appreciate and recognize the people who you celebrate. Know that these aren't just artists; these are superheroes. These are people who overcame incredible odds to succeed brilliantly in an industry that was not created for them, in an industry not run by them, an industry that does not look like them. So if they have succeeded, it's because they had incredible powers. They had incredible connection, and
Mhm.
they were really truly special human beings. Beyond the fact that they were
Mhm.
singers or dancers or actors or whatever, they were human beings that just were not going to be denied, and we can learn a lot from that.
Mm. That's wonderful, Phil. And say again where it is, honey, so we can tell
At the
everyone.
Hollywood Museum, which is on Highland and Hollywood Boulevard, it's the old Max Factor building, and Danelle Donegan is the president, and she runs the roost over there. She's a brilliant woman and does so many things for the community, not just the acting community, but underserved communities. We had a councilwoman there, and just so many people. And the room was filled with diversity. I mean, the room was filled with diversity. And I said, the
Mm-hmm.
answer to all this stuff that's going on right now is in this room.
That's
Not just
right.
the exhibits, but
That's
it's in
right.
this room. All of you who are here, gay, straight, queer, black, white, rich, poor, whatever, all
Mm-hmm.
of you are in this room. You're all here for one reason and a shared consciousness. And we have to resonate with that in our society right now because so much is trying to be taken away.
We really do. Knowledge is power, which is the name of our show tonight. And part of that knowledge is knowing you not only your history, but the history of America. And the history of America includes many different ethnic groups.
Hmm.
And this is the last week of Black History Month. Congratulations, Phil, on being a part of that exhibit. Congratulations, Papa, to our daddy too for being part of that exhibit because we were kids during the summertime. Mom and dad, no, sorry, dad had us
Mm-hmm.
read Black history books,
Mm-hmm.
and we had to give book reports at the end of the summer about not everyone in the book, but many people in the book. And he also had us read a poem, one titled "Myself," and the other one was "Desiderata." And that created for us, and I would say for me, an understanding of who I could be. On television when we grew up, you guys, all we saw were uh, blonde and blue-eyed people, people that did not look like us or any ethnic group on television. Casting no aspersions when I say that. It's just the fact of what was on TV. So to be able to read books about Black scientists, Black aviators, Black business people, Black entertainers, so forth and so on, anything, think of any role in society, Black people have been a part of it, and they've been a big part of it. But that's not something that was taught to us in school. What was taught to us in school was slavery, and that was a sliver of that week's history lesson. But Black people have a history that started way before slavery, and also just us to know about so many things that were accomplished. I know gave me a shoot. I can do it. Then I can do it. I may not see anyone living right now when so much of us are watching television that's on television, but I read it. I know it's true, so I know that it's possible. Every day this Black History Month for on the Vision is Possible IG um, page as well as on my own, there's been a different Black person celebrated every day. Today was Althea Gibson. And I encourage you to not only go to my page, but other pages because if you are Black, it will inspire you as to what you can do. If you are not, it will let you know some of that. If you have fear, if you have no understanding, this will give you more understanding of who we are. And that's why we need to hold on to our history, to
Everybody's.
every, and
Everybody's history,
I would say that
right?
American history
Yeah.
is just going
I
to
don't
get
want
there.
us all to be the same.
Not at all. Not at all. Indigenous people history, Asian, there's so much history of good people in every culture. So for us to have a prejudice against a culture that really comes from lack of knowledge and a fear that's really not based in anything. So, and it's interesting that we're having this discussion, Phil, because of our guest tonight who's coming on.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure gonna enlighten us to many things. But to mention about Black History Month once again, there's been a lot of blowback. How come it's only a month and Black History Month should not be reduced to this or that? Listen, celebrate Black people all you want every single day of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that we're highlighting for at least 28 days the achievement of Americans,
Yeah.
the achievement of people of color. I mean, we could never do it and we never learn anything. So, in giving us this, let's be grateful and let's move forward and handle it with grace and teach and learn and express every month that there is. What is next month? Women's Month? Who are you going to tell me you ain't going to celebrate
Every
women every day of your life? Yeah,
That's
you
right.
are. We're just giving a moment to people who haven't had their moments, to people who have had less than their moments. So I, for one, appreciate that we are bracketing whoever it is in that particular month so that we can really see it. Because if not, a lot of us wouldn't look at it and we would not see these people.
And you guys, right now, with what's happening, Black History is they're trying to take it away. Women's Month, they're trying to take away. Any celebration of any special group, they're trying to take away. And I put quotations around special group. So right now, we have Black History in February, which is great. But I promise you, things go the way they are. We are all going to have to do our own research, which is part of why Ben Railton has been invited to come to us today, because we're going to have to do our own research and stay aware of the many men and women and thems of all ethnic groups, all cultures, of what they have given to this world, not only to our country. And Ward, yeah, February is the shortest month, but like Phil says, we got a month. We got a month to celebrate. It doesn't have to be only in February at all. So go, you guys, to the Hollywood Museum and check it out. And I wonder, can you check it out? I wonder if online, if you go to them online, if we can also check out what
Yeah, I'm sure that there's
exhibit. Don't you think so?
some photos or videos of the speeches that we made, and but if you do live in the Los Angeles area and you can get over there, I highly advise you to go do it. It's not just that exhibit; several other exhibits that, if you're into
Of
Hollywood at all,
course.
are just amazing. And remember, it's the old Max Factor building, so it in itself is a historic venue,
Oh
and
gosh.
just honored to be there. Honored that last year they had Dad's suit, and honored that they saw fit to have one of my suits there. And in fact, to button this, and then we can talk about Ben. Um, the documentary I did was about the character that I played in the movie called Atlantis, and that character is Doctor Sweet, Doctor Josiah Strongbear Sweet, to give you the whole thing. But
Mm.
he is the first African American representation in a Disney feature film, animated feature film. We've had African Americans, people of color, play voices of animals, birds, and whatnot, but never have we had an animated African American representation as one of the lead characters in a Walt Disney animated film.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky enough to voice that character, and Dr. Sweet is the first representation of our color of our culture to be depicted in a Walt Disney animated film. So it was very, very special. Both of those days were just beyond absolutely fantastic.
That's awesome, Philly. That's so so awesome. Dad would be quite proud, and I'm sure he is, as he's with us every single day. So let me tell you guys about Ben Railton. It's fantastic that he's here today. I had, as I told you, every day I've been putting up information highlighting a different Black person in history. And as I'm researching and everything that I've done with this, I've gone online and Googled several different articles, including, of course, starting with Wikipedia and then going from there to get information on any of these people who I've highlighted to make sure what is true and to also just just pulling out all the information. And I ran across Ben Railton's articles, and I enjoyed what he was writing, and I enjoyed very much where he was coming from, because his writings are about um, Black history. It's about all history,
Mm.
Chinese history, American history. It's about patriotism. He has written 6 books. He's a fascinating, interesting man. And as you guys know, with us on YouTube now, and still with you guys on Instagram, and really developing the show, we want to invite more people from different walks of life to give us information about our not only about our country and about us, but also what is going on right now in the world. So just let me read you some of Ben's bio, and then I'm going to, of course, play his intro video. Ben is finishing his 20th years as a professor of English and American Studies at Fitchburg State University in Massachusetts. Now, he's the author of 6 books, which I told you. Most recently, of the I Sing, the contested history of American patriotism. the creator of the podcast, The Celestials' Last Game, Baseball, Bigotry, and the Battle for America, which is really interesting. It's about this group of Chinese men who started this baseball team. He's just fascinating. And he's got, he's got two kids. And you know what? Instead of me going on, I think I've given you enough information. And let me introduce you to Ben Relton.
Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plains seeking a home where he himself is free. America never was America to me. The 1965 Immigration Act was part of the larger group of laws and policies known as the Great Society. President Lyndon B. Johnson had proposed that program in his 1964 speech, accepting the presidential nomination, arguing that we should build a great society, a place where the meaning of man's life matches the marvels of man's labor.
Ben.
Hey, Ben.
Hi. Hi, Iona. Hi, Phil. Thank you so much for having me. I feel really blessed that Iona, you found some of my work, and I just feel honored to be on this phenomenal podcast and talking to the two of y'all. You are incredibly inspiring, impressive folks, and it's just a great conversation to be part of. So thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome.
Yeah, Iona, I am. Kudos to you for finding Mr. Railton, having gone through some of his writings. And it just is so perfect that he's here,
Mm-hmm.
especially right now. So thank you, Ben, for taking the time to be with us. We are beyond honored.
My pleasure.
Yes. So Ben, tell us usually you're a different guest in this way. We start. Well, tell us where you come from, Ben. What got you into what brings you to using your mind in such a way with with our
History.
with history. Yes, thank you, Phil. Please tell us something about you.
Sure. So I was thinking about this in planning to be talking to you all and trying to kind of boil down because we all have so many influences and inspirations for
Mm.
what leads us to where we are. And I will tell you that the 1980s reboot of Mission Impossible was an early influence for me. So as I say, I feel really honored to be here. But in terms of the historical questions and subjects, I think it started for me with community. I grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is a place that we've all become a lot more familiar with, unfortunately,
Mm.
in the last decade, but which has this long history, I would say, of both the hardest and some of the best of what an American community can be. For example, it was the last school system in America to integrate racially. They resisted the Supreme Court after Brown v. Board for 6 years rather than integrate the public schools in Charlottesville. So it was a community that had these long histories of segregation and prejudice and, again, some of the worst of America. But it also was a community that had so many folks in it who defied that kind of division and represented some of the best. So, for example, the guy who taught me to teach in the Charlottesville public school taught me to swim, excuse me, in the Charlottesville public schools was an older African American man named Mr. Byers, William Byers, who himself had been not allowed to swim in most Charlottesville pools. He was a young man, but who had still developed into one of the city's best lifeguards and recreational um, leaders and became the swim teacher for the whole public school system in the 1980s. And it just was this huge presence in my life and influence on me. So I think it started with community and then certainly with family and community as well, including my parents who were both teachers in that community of Charlottesville and really connected me to so many different sides of that. And then the second level that, again, really connects to why I'm so excited to be talking with you all, for me, was culture and the different
Mm.
ways that cultural works could start to expand my horizons. And so I'll just give you one example. I was a huge Civil War buff when I was growing up. I was a little kid in Virginia. I was fascinated with the Civil War. But when I learned about the Civil War, both in school and from a lot of what I was reading, it was pretty much entirely the white experience of the Civil War. The white soldiers on both sides, the that whole narrative of the Civil War, brother against brother, those kinds of themes or narratives. And then when I was 12, I saw the movie Glory in theaters when it
Mm.
came out. And
Mm.
it just reminded me all of a sudden, or it didn't remind me, it taught me all of a sudden that there was this whole other way to remember that history that I had not been taught, that I was not even reading, and that I needed to learn a lot more about through things like the United States colored troops, the African American soldiers who were so huge in deciding the Civil War and keeping America together and representing the best of our history at that incredibly fraught moment. So a cultural work like that then led me to read and research more and just develop so much more of my interests and identity. So community and culture, I think, is where it started for me, and then it's just been a
Mm.
lifelong attempt to keep learning about these things.
Yeah, our
Hmm.
environment says so much to us, doesn't it? And it informs so much of how we develop as human beings. Certainly, Iona and I, having grown up with a man who just defied logic, as far as I'm concerned, because so he was so himself, right, Iona,
Hmm.
uh, that he couldn't be denied. And I think that's what I learned from him was that we, like I said, when we started the program, we were in the house with Black History. That's that's who he was, and he showed me. Iona was talking about the books he had us read. Being with him showed me there was no ceiling. Being around him showed me that it was
Hmm.
all possible. And so many people have come up to me, and I'm sure I know you too, to tell me that they have become engineers or doctors or professors or electricians because they saw that it was possible
Yes.
through our father's efforts. So, Ben, when you mention about your environment and the culture around you, that certainly is strong mana, strong medicine, and I really respect that you've taken that influence and you have processed it in the way that you have, because a lot of people would not. They would go another direction with that, and I'm very taken by how you want to represent the misrepresented and those that have either not been heard incorrectly. A couple of my favorite movies from the past few years. One is called The Zone of Interest. The Zone of Interest is a movie about a Nazi commandant who oversees a concentration camp. But you never see the concentration camp. You only see it outside the walls. It is from their point of view, not the point of view of those in the camp, which is what we see quite a bit of, but from the point of view of the German Nazi soldier who is tasked with watching these people. It's a perspective I never, ever thought of.
Mm.
I never saw or felt the other side of the coin. And I think that what you're doing is bringing the other side of the coin to people. The other side of history, there's always two tales to tell. And usually history is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, written by those who are in power. And so get that narrative. So I really appreciate that you're taking up the side of the unheard. That is honorable, my friend.
I appreciate that. And I think one of the reasons I have wanted to do that for so long, just to add in kind of one more example of a factor or an influence for me, is that, and this really connects to what the tone that you all create on this podcast so powerfully, is that, and it also connects to what you were saying about your dad and his influence on people. I think the most inspiring stories that I've ever encountered have come from these things that I've learned more about and gotten to share. I think there's this idea that some of these histories are just the hardest histories or the most painful ones, and so I think sometimes there are well-meaning people who argue that we shouldn't focus on the breadth of American history because it's depressing or it's
Mm.
too painful,
Hmm.
it's too difficult. And of course we have to engage those things, and I'm an advocate for engaging the hardest. But again, I have found the most inspiration when I'm engaging with those histories, when I'm connecting with them. The baseball team that Iona mentioned are an example. That's a group of Chinese American young men who are tragically affected by the Chinese Exclusion Act, by that period of American history. But also, just like one of my favorite stories of all of American history is that baseball team. And the only way that we could learn about it is if we also learn about that period and some of those hardest histories.
Mm-hmm.
So finding that inspiration, finding that vision that you all talk about and model so fully, we have to be willing to dig into those histories and stories. It's the only way we're going to get there.
Why are we
Right.
afraid? I'm sorry,
Uh,
Ona.
look,
I don't mean it. But why are we afraid of those stark realities, Ben, in your estimation?
Yeah, I mean, fear is a good word for it. I do think it is based in part on fear of two things, I would say. One is fear of those we feel are different from ourselves, right? And that's usually not true. Again, the more we learn, the more we realize how much we share
oh.
and connect.
Mm-hmm.
But we fear that idea. But then I would say even more than that, I think we fear confronting our worst selves, right? If you just think about as
Yeah,
individual people, one of the hardest
yeah.
things we can do is try to like face the things that are the worst in us, our flaws, our limits, and so it's really easy as a collective to also want to say, let's just focus on the best, let's just focus on the ideals. And again, I think that's often well-meaning. I don't think it's just about bigotry or exclusion. Those things can happen, but it's also that desire to sort of only try to remember the things that make us feel immediately good. But again, when we do that, it's really superficial, it's really partial, and it does leave out, I think, really the best stories, the best of us, which have to come through confronting those harder things. So I do think fear is a great word, and I think it's both of those kinds of fears that really
Mm-hmm.
inspire that worst kind of reaction.
You know, what you were just telling us about your growing up right now with what's happening with history wanting to be taken away, the management of what books we read, not wanting to look at what is the dark side, which is in all of us, that happens. If you had not seen glory, if you had not met that wonderful man who taught you how to swim, you wouldn't be who you are today. You wouldn't have a full roundness of understanding another culture that actually influences you in a very positive way. That is what I'm concerned about is happening now. What are you finding as a teacher that you're out there? Are you finding students open to what you're teaching? I see a lot of comments here about how much they love you and you are an inspiration. You are their hero.
And I appreciate all of that love and support. I think one of the biggest problems with that attitude that you're highlighting that is so prevalent these days is that it really underestimates young people. It really underestimates
Mm-hmm.
students and young people who are absolutely able to confront these histories and these stories, the worst and the best. And our job, not only as teachers, but as adults, as parents, as people in a society, our job is to help us do that work together,
Mm-hmm.
again, rather than to pretend we can only look at the most superficial, um, simplistic, and ultimately really not productive, divisive ideas. So I think our students, I think our young people are fully able to do that work, and I think it does them a disservice not only in the long term, but even just immediately to act as if they only need, again, these very simple kind of ways of understanding. They're ready to do the work. They're ready to be in those conversations, and I find it's more adults trying to speak for these ideas
Mm-hmm.
rather than really allowing us to have those conversations.
Yeah, it's funny. We don't think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, you know? And that's what we kind of need to do. We do ourselves no service by denying our difficulties. Just, I'll take my own life. I
Mm-hmm.
am best when I confront the me that needs to be confronted. I am best when I stumble, fall, get up, look backwards, and go, why did I stumble again? What was that I tripped over? I would rather not do that again in future. And I think the mistake that we make, whether people get upset about reparations or, if you actually admit the transgressions against indigenous people, oh, we're going to have to pay them back. Well, I don't want to have to pay anybody back. Well, let's look at it this way. Let's just go forward. Why don't we just look at
Mm.
where we were, how difficult it was, or how beautiful it was, and allow all of us to go forward, as opposed to continuing to apologize and go backwards? I don't need an apology. I just need an acknowledgement. I just need an awareness of what has happened so that we can move forward in strength and not stumble and trip over stuff again. Make America great again? No, America's always great, always going to be great, and it's always going to be shit. It's going to be both. We can't have one without the other, so that when you try to exclude the difficulties in your own life, you do yourself a disservice by not learning the lesson, and you are then doomed to repeat it. I just, I don't know. I feel kind of bad for the people that are ignorant to that fact. You know, the universe will provide. We got to catch up to it.
We do, and all the things you were just saying, Phil, remind me the poem that was part of my intro that I know you read so beautifully. The excerpt from in the intro is this poem by Langston Hughes called "Let America Be America Again," and it was in a recent column that I wrote for that Saturday Evening Post column that you mentioned briefly, and I made the case there that that poem and Hughes kind of really represent this idea of patriotism that I make the case for, which I call critical patriotism. There's the more kind of mythic patriotism, the one that says we can only focus on the best. And if we do
Mm.
anything that other than that, we're not being patriotic. We're being just critical.
Mm.
My argument
Hmm.
is that patriotism is at its best, like love is at its best, like self-awareness is at its best, when it can grapple with the hard things and then make the case. And so I want to make sure I get the quote right. It's one of my favorite quotes from all of American history from James Baldwin, the amazing James Baldwin, in a very early essay of his, Notes on a Native Son. He kind of sums up this critical patriotism that I think you were just talking about so eloquently, Phil, where he writes, I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. And it's that combination like that. It's not either or. In fact, it has to be both. It has to be both. That's and again, that's what I mean. I think we all as humans know that that's what love should be, right? If you really love someone, you're not going to say, I refuse to acknowledge any flaws. You are just perfect. This is just perfect. We know that's not going to last as a relationship,
Right.
and it can't last as a country either. It can't last as a community, not in the ways we need it to. So I do think that idea of critical patriotism, critical
Mm.
optimism, confronting and, as you say, moving forward, not either or, but together, both of those things.
Hmm. Well, you mentioned that Glory was a great inspiration to you. You also mentioned the book about or the podcast rather about the Chinese baseball team. Is the Chinese baseball team, or is there another great influence for you?
Oh, there's so many. There's so many. I could take the rest of our time for sure. But
But
one
something
example that I'll
something
mention,
important you would also like for us to maybe look into, our audience, that would be
absolutely.
interesting to them.
I'll mention two quickly that are both really relevant for Black History Month, which we are still celebrating, as of course we should celebrate it 366 days a year, or at least
Mhm.
365 and a quarter when it's not a leap year. And so just two that I'll quickly mention. One that's right here in Massachusetts, and then one that's, I think, my favorite single moment in American history. So the Massachusetts one that I think we've maybe started to learn a little more about, but I think most Americans would still love to know, is that in Massachusetts at the time of the American Revolution, there are enslaved people still. Massachusetts was still a slave state at the Revolutionary moment. The whole nation still were. But you have enslaved people in Massachusetts during the American Revolution who use the ideals of the Declaration of Independence and the Revolution to argue for their own freedom from enslavement, to argue that legally they should not be enslaved because this is a nation that is professing things like all men are created equal. And so you have a woman like Elizabeth Freeman here in Massachusetts, who's an enslaved woman in the 1780s, who wins a court case to gain her freedom by using the language of the Declaration of Independence and the Massachusetts state constitution, which was based on the Declaration, to gain her own freedom, and then really inspires the end of slavery in Massachusetts. That comes about
Hmm.
because of court cases like that one. So that's one example of something that as soon as I learned it, like there could not be a better representation of our revolutionary ideals, of what those
Mm.
revolutionary ideals meant. And so, like, to me, Elizabeth Freeman is a founding mother, a founding father kind of figure. This is a embodiment of that revolution and those
Mm.
ideals. So that's one example. And then the other one that I'll mention that's probably my favorite single moment, and it does connect to the hardest histories, but it's also just the best of what we want to be as people, as Americans, is the amazing journalist and activist Ida B. Wells, who was an anti-lynching author and activist in the late 19th and early 20th century. Among a billion other things she did, she also like started her own kindergarten in Chicago because her young children were not being allowed to attend kindergartens because of segregation. So she just founded her own kindergarten. She's just an amazing woman in every way. But the moment I want to point to, just specifically and quickly, I think it's the bravest moment that I know of in American history.
Mm.
She's a young journalist in Memphis where she had grown up and started working. She had founded a newspaper there. And um, three friends of hers, African American men in Memphis, are lynched in 1892. They run a supermarket, and an angry white mob tries to burn down their supermarket, and they fight back and they're killed. They're murdered. And Wells writes about covers that lynching in her newspaper in Memphis. And then while she's traveling around the country doing anti lynching work, another white mob burns down her newspaper office in Memphis and says pretty much explicitly, if she continues to do this work, her life is at risk. She needs to stop doing this work entirely. And the day that she learns about that in New York City, where she's on this tour, the day that she hears that this has happened, she arranges publication for her first book of anti lynching writing. So she just immediately says, not only am I not going to give in to those fears and that terrorism,
Mm.
I'm gonna take the fight to a whole nother level. I'm going to ramp up everything that I'm doing. And again, I can't imagine any American not finding that just an embodiment of like how we should best try to live our lives, the best that we should do for our community, for
Mm.
our fellow people, for the things we are passionate about. So those are a couple examples that just to me embody our ideals, the best of who we want to be. And that as I've learned more and more, again, I just find more and more of those stories and histories and figures that we all could be inspired by. So those are a couple examples.
Oh, that is why we needed you here at this time to
I,
give us those examples.
mm, there, you mentioned
Mm.
I have to give Hollywood props a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, because we do
Mm-hmm.
reveal. You had
Mm-hmm.
mentioned something in one of the articles you've written about the Killers of the Flower Moon,
Mm-hmm.
which is a brilliant movie. If anybody's never seen it, please see it. Leonardo
Mm-hmm.
DiCaprio, De Niro, I believe Martin Scorsese directed it. It's phenomenal. That we just mentioned, Glory, Amistad.
Mm-hmm.
There is a history of the industry revealing certain things to the public. I just mentioned the zone of interest um, that help shine a light on some of these injustices. And even though they're movies, even though they're entertainment, they pack a wallop. And the more we
Yes.
have that, the more,
Yes.
Ben, we have people like you who can enlighten us because of your passion for these subjects, the better we are. And so that it really boggles the mind that people want to silence or do away with various parts of our history and our facts in order to make us what? Better in some way? How does that strengthen us when
Weakens
we
us.
are only, yes, we are only focusing on, as Ben
Mm-hmm.
says, the rainbows and the unicorns and yes, I appreciate America for all that it is with all of that, but I also want to know how we can get better based on our shared difficulties. And each
Mm-hmm.
culture, race, creed, religion has had it, and nobody's perfect. African Americans are not perfect just because we have been put upon. Jews are not perfect because they were just put upon. I mean, every culture has stuff. Let's all look at our stuff, take care of our houses, and move forward together.
What was
Seems
the phrase? Do we want
logical.
to be known by the worst of us? No. And there's so much more about us that is good. It weakens us not to familiarize ourselves with the supposed called other in our society.
And I really, just to circle back as well, Phil, to what you were saying about cultural works like Hollywood films and other cultural works, I think not only that they have that important role to play, but often stories and storytelling are the best ways that we can connect to these, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
another thing that sometimes people feel is that history is this dry collection of, dates or facts that
Mm.
at best are going to just be something we're supposed to learn, and at worst
Mm.
are, much worse than that. But ultimately, it is about story. It's about the stories of people like Wells or Elizabeth Freeman or that baseball team. It's about the stories that storytelling can capture so powerfully. And I think across my whole life, the works that have most inspired me have been things like films or novels or
Mm-hmm.
poetry. I'm teaching Langston Hughes right now, so I'm thinking a lot about poetry and just how these cultural works can open up the stories and the identities, and then we can research them more. We can learn all the layers. But I agree, and I think Hollywood is a great example. I think so many forms of culture have work to do, and again, just to connect to another one of these current narratives, there's this idea that if those stories connect to these multiple histories, that they're too woke or that kind of attack,
Mm.
rather than that they are again capturing these best kind of stories that we have and
Mm-hmm.
highlighting them for us. That's not about
Mm-hmm.
just a present perspective or debate. That's about reconnecting with these stories that have always been there, but that we can better be aware of and be inspired by. So I think culture has a huge place to play.
That's what I think we do in our businesses. We reflect society. We also inform and we inspire, and our stories come from history. Our stories come from that. And so you're so right, Phil. I agree with you too. And Ben, Glory, just one film that we are mentioning, was so inspiring. Right now, look at Shogun. Look what Shogun is doing as we watch it, and the awards it's won. Not only because it looks pretty, but the stories, the human stories. No matter if they don't look like us, they appeal to all of us. And from that, we get a chance to know that we all love our families. We all want to work. We all want to take vacations. Ba, 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 ba. We all have something to say about this world. We are a melting pot, and it is what has
Well,
made
Ben
America so successful.
Ben said it. The more we understand these stories, the more we realize, wait a minute,
Oh,
that look a
yes,
little bit like me.
that's
That look
right.
that look maybe it looks a lot like me. Just because it happened all the way across the water, we're talking about Shogun, doesn't mean they love any differently. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean they love less. Doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
they hurt less. It doesn't mean that their pain isn't as deep as ours. And when we find ourselves revealing and reveling in all of these cultural realities, it brings us closer together. It
Mm-hmm.
has that power. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we need to continue to share. And when we stop telling those stories, when we cut off the influences, we can no longer share. So it cannot resonate with all of us because we won't know it. And that's a huge mistake. It's
Very
ignorance,
much
as far as
so.
I'm.
Very much so.
Yeah, that's well said. And one of the skills that I think that these kinds of stories can build in us, and it is a skill. I don't think it's just innate in us, although it's in there too, is something like empathy, right? Is the ability
Mm,
to feel with others and feel what others are feeling in that deep way, not just sympathy or not just awareness, but that real empathy, that real connection. And I think so many of our most divisive kind of policies or actions get a lot harder if we're truly empathizing, right? If we're truly connecting to
mm,
what
mm,
this is going to mean for others living their lives as themselves and as us, in that connected way. And again, I think I learned empathy in a variety of ways, certainly from my parents, from people around me, from people like Mr. Byers, but I also learned it from cultural works. I learned it from reading
Mm-hmm.
and watching and listening to these amazing voices and stories that helped me connect to others. And I'll also just say there was a good question a little bit above that I didn't want to lose sight of in the chat. A question about my sons and an experience of theirs that I wrote about in another of my Saturday Evening Post columns, where they had to deal with prejudice that they experienced. They're multiracial young men themselves. And so I also continue to learn it from people like them, from people who inspire me, the way that they responded to that, the way that they're living their lives, the way they are connecting to the world around them in a variety of ways. I think if we're open to these inspirations from community, from family, and from culture and history, again, it can build something like empathy rather than divide us, which is so much what
Mm-hmm.
the narrative seems to be right now, that it's only going to divide us, so we have to shut it down. I don't think
Mm.
anything is further from the truth.
You also write a lot
Ben,
about
oh, go ahead, sweetie.
patriotism. Thanks. You also write a lot about patriotism. Can you share some of what your thoughts are about that
Yeah, what
as
does that look
well?
like? What does patriotism look like to Ben?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for the last 4 years pretty continually, since that most recent
Simple
project came
question,
out.
please.
Yes, very much straightforward. And that book, the book of mine about patriotism of D.I. Singh, came out about a month after the January 6th insurrection in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, 2021. And so it really felt like a moment where we were just surrounded by what I would call the mythic form of patriotism, which is the idea that the only way to be a patriot is to only focus on a very particular version of America and American history, and to exclude everyone and everything who are outside of that definition. I think that version of patriotism that I define as mythic patriotism has become, it's always been present, but I think it's become this hugely dominant force. I do think it's at the heart of the idea of something like Make America Great Again. It's this very mythic vision of patriotism. And again, it excludes anybody who doesn't agree with it. And so a
Mm.
big part of the reason I wrote that book was to argue that, in fact, there are multiple possibilities for what patriotism can mean. And I had mentioned the James Baldwin quote and the idea of critical patriotism, that it is not only possible to be critical of the worst of us while arguing for the best of us, but that really
Mm.
ultimately is, to me, the more active and the more inspiring form of patriotism, because again, it doesn't insult us. It doesn't imagine that we have to only have this most simple way to think about. It allows us to think about our complexity and then to still move forward toward a more perfect union, to move forward toward our ideals more fully for all of us. So that's really at the heart of it for me, is the debate between the mythic and the critical patriotisms, between the kind that wants to exclude and that wants to only idealize, and the kind that says, no, we can fight for our best by recognizing our shared challenges, as you all have been saying too, and then moving forward through that work. I think that's really the core of how I've thought about it over these last few years. And I do think it's one of these things where we can't just sort of hand over the idea of patriotism to that one version, to that current exclude, and say, okay, they own that and we have to argue for something else. We have to think about something else. I think we can own a more inclusive form of patriotism, one that is more critical and includes all of us. And then we can fight for
Mm-hmm.
that, just like we can think about
Mm-hmm.
America that way, right? We're not going to
Mm-hmm.
turn America over to one vision of it. We're going to try to own the one that we want to fight for. And I feel the same about patriotism for sure.
And
The
you,
for all of us is, hold on, the for all of us is the important part of all of that. And I
mm-hmm.
think
Yeah.
that's what's being lost. It is very segmented these days. It is very agenda driven, as opposed to an inclusive vision for all. Interesting story, real
Yes.
quick, I'll tell about when Obama was running for the second term. And I'll be honest, I wasn't thrilled with his first term and everything he did or didn't do. That's my own personal opinion. I'm talking to another friend of mine, and we're getting ready to vote again, and he's running again. And this was a white cat that I'm talking to, and he's like, "Man, hands down, Obama." I'm like, "Well, why do you think hands down Obama?" He goes, "Well, think about it. Barack Obama came from a situation where he was disadvantaged, used all of the situations he could to his advantage, went to Harvard Law School, became what he became this junior senator. He went back to Chicago, and he went back to the to public school systems. He went back to the community. He gave his all. Yeah, he could have done anything. He could have gone to private practice. He could have made millions of dollars based on his law and legal mind. He didn't. He came back and gave everything he had to the people. And he says, I put that up against Mitt Romney because that's who was running. And it's just a no-brainer, Phil. I truly feel that even though I don't agree with everything, I feel that everything he's doing is for all of us, whether
Mm-hmm.
he gets it right or wrong. Nobody gets it right
Mm-hmm.
completely. A lot of people stumble on there and fall, but they're trying. If you feel that they're trying their best for all of us, it's a bit of a no-brainer for me. And that's what I don't find. I don't find that we are
No,
dealing with leaders or administration that is looking at all of us and wants
no.
all of us to. And so, saying that, Ben, the all of us part of it is the most powerful part of it for me when you talk about that and how you view patriotism, because it is for everybody. It's not black or white or brown or green,
Mm-mm.
it's everyone. I have a question.
Yeah.
What makes you pick your subjects? What makes you land on a particular theme for your podcast? Anything? What does it for you? What draws you?
So I think it's a couple things. I think story is a big part of it. To circle back to what we were talking about, I do think I personally just am most inspired by compelling stories like Ida B. Wells publishing that book, or this baseball team and their last game, which was the ultimate focus of that most recent work that I did. So I think story is a big part of it. I do think we as people, certainly me, but I really believe all of us, truly connect to and through the stories that we tell. And they can be used in really negative ways, they can be used in the worst ways, but at their best they do represent so much of the best of us and our history and identity. So stories are always a starting point for me, finding these stories that really inspire and interest me and have layers and are complicated and are rich. So that's certainly one part of it. But then the other part of it, just to circle back to something we've been talking about throughout this great conversation, is finding those moments that have the worst and the best at the
Mm,
same time.
Mm-hmm.
mm,
I
mm,
really, really think too much of the time, even for those of us who want to argue for a more diverse America or for inclusion, those things feel like they're separate. Like we can be critical of the worst and then fight for the best. But I do think they coexist. They're always in us, in our moments, in our communities. And so finding the moments that include both allows us to really do that work of grappling with the hard stuff and arguing for the best of us. And so stories in general, and then specifically stories that open up the worst and best, that really to me kind of like gets at the heart of why I want to do what I do. And I think those are the things that can inspire us most truly and most fully, rather than the ones that again are more either or more simplistic.
mm,
It's those
mm.
ones that we can dig into. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was, it just came out of me, but I thought none of us are good all the time. None of
No,
us are pretty all the time. None of us.
What?
There is not one. I know, Phil, is shocking, huh? There is not any story that does not have where were you in 2000 so and so, what were you doing, you know what I mean? We all have something, and it's what drives everything theatrically, even comedically, in our line of work. If there is a story that has nothing dark or something that you're fighting against or fighting through or for, it does not resonate. That creates the problem I feel we're living through right now. It's not always pretty pictures. I love what you just said, that those stories really move you, because that's what's important to find, and that's also what will resonate with us when we read it. And I can hear that in the way that you write and how connected you are with it. You, I'd like for you to stay on one thing. I want you to stay with what you were talking about with patriotism, because you say there are four distinct forms. You spoke of one, the mythic. I'd like for you to share the other three with us.
sure, sure. And um, I think the kind of default one, which is, I think, perfectly fine as a shared kind of ritual, I call celebratory patriotism, which is, standing for the national anthem with your hand on your heart, right? Just, celebrations of a nation that we're part of, as a community that we share. So that's kind of what I would consider the default type. That's celebratory patriotism. Um, the problem that I try to identify in that project is I think sometimes that slides over into the mythic kind,
Mm,
because it suggests that if we don't fully celebrate one version of America, then we're not being patriotic at all. And I think that, again, to me, that's the worst kind, that mythic kind that says it's us and them. You're either entirely with this one view, or you're not a patriot. You're not even maybe an American. So that's the second type, the mythic type. Opposed to that is that idea of critical patriotism, of being able to love and criticize, as James Baldwin put it, and to see that they have to coexist. That's the mythic type. And then the fourth type is what I call active, which means sort of service and sacrifice on behalf of trying to make the nation better. So we started this conversation with the U.S. colored troops during the Civil War. Frederick Douglass, who I saw came up in one of the comments, he explicitly says that about those soldiers. He says they are forcing themselves to be recognized as full citizens because of their service and sacrifice. Unfortunately, many Americans continued not to allow for that possibility. But I certainly think service and sacrifice on behalf, you can do it by protest, right? You can do it by all kinds of activism that sort of expresses actively our fight for a better nation. So that's the idea of active patriotism. So celebratory, kind of a default, but it can turn into that mythic kind that leaves out way too many Americans. So then it's about kind of fighting for the inclusive America. And that to me is the critical and the active patriotisms that I make the case for.
Quite profound and interesting. I've got a question from one of our regulars. Ben, can you share and or highlight an example in history you believe could really be talking points that could fuel the fire in not just us, but perhaps the younger generation?
Sure. And that, again, those are the kinds of stories that I'm always drawn to. And so I'll highlight one that is connected to the Chinese American baseball team in the 1870s and 80s, but is just a little bit adjacent to them in that same moment. And it's also connected to another fight that we're unfortunately having right now, which is a fight for the idea of birthright citizenship, that every person born in the United States is a citizen of the U.S. And that idea develops really in that period after the Civil War. It's included in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. And it then becomes a question of whether that's going to also apply to Chinese American young people who are born in the U.S. The amendment certainly says that it should, that all folks born in the U.S., but there are many white supremacists in that era who argue no, that it can't possibly apply to young Chinese Americans, to young Asian Americans. They are an other. They are not part of America in that argument. And the people who really fight to extend birthright citizenship, to guarantee that it extends to young Chinese Americans, are teenagers, basically. Teenagers and early 20-something Chinese American young people. There's a whole number of them who are detained on things like ships in harbors when they're returning to the U.S. and are told that they are not citizens, even though they were born in the United States. And these young people, some as young as 12, 13 years old, with their allies, fight a series of court cases to guarantee that the 14th Amendment applies to them as well. And that leads up to a Supreme Court case in the 1890s that says, yes, the amendment does apply to all born in the U.S., including Asian American, Chinese American young people. So I think that's an example of a moment that really reminds us that young people have a role to play in all of this as well. It's not just about, me in my graying late 40s. It's about everybody making that case for their rights, for their equality, for their inclusion, but also for all of ours. Those young people are fighting way beyond just their own battle. They're fighting for that concept, that ideal of birthright citizenship for all Americans. And they win that right. We have to keep fighting for it. It's under attack again, but we have these models like those young people who can remind us of that fight.
Precedent has been set.
Which is being patriotic in their fight. They are being patriotic.
100%.
I'd like to share with you guys, Ben has mentioned a few of his books, and I'd like to just share the 6 of them with you here. Of Thee I Sing is what he mentioned, We the People. Also here, History and Hope in American Literature, as well as the Chinese Exclusion Act, what it can teach us about America. Redefining American Identity, Contesting the Past, Reconstructing the Nation. You can find all of these books, I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong. Been on Amazon, but right now I'd like to encourage you to go to a bookstore
Yes.
and find these books.
Pick it up
And
in your hands, people.
that's right. Pick up that piece of paper and read them.
But
Ben,
also, just if I can,
please,
sorry, if I could just say quickly, I have
please.
electronic copies of at least four of those six,
Oh, great.
and I'm very happy. I'm very happy to email them to people. This is not, we do this for the love of it. We do this for the stories, for the ideas, and it's not about those the cups of coffee with the royalty checks. It's about sharing these stories and these ideas. So if for whatever reason people don't feel that they're able to get their hands on them in other ways, or just would like to reach out, please reach out. And I have electronic copies that I can send folks for sure.
Well, with that being said, Ben, let me bring this up just a little early. Here is information, you guys, where you can find Ben, um, the daily blog, and below is his email. And if you cannot remember this, please do reach out to me, and I will send this to you, so you can reach him and get those electric copies, and also possibly continue the conversation from there.
Please.
Von Joy, who just might have just joined us, she didn't know, but she brings up again that your recent podcast explores the Chinese Exclusion Act, Bright White Citizenship, and the Celestial Team. And that's what we were just talking about earlier, Vaughn. So thank you for that. Ben, you're just wonderful.
Amazing.
Just wow.
Amazing. When I
Thank
read
you.
who you were and what you did and
Please.
how you did it, I could not wait to talk to you, man.
I You have no idea how much, if I could go back and tell 12-year-old me watching Mission Impossible in 1989 that you just said that, Phil. He would definitely not believe it. He also wouldn't know what the internet is or podcasts or
Google?
so he would be confused on multiple levels. But and I'll also just say, since you mentioned your dad, that his work on the original show as well. I just think I know you were talking about representation right before I
Yes.
joined, and my wife, for example, is a huge Atlantis fan. So your character on that was a
Awesome.
huge inspiration for her as a young person, and that's one other level of this, right? Is representation
Yeah.
too. It is just
Yes.
the way that the more we encounter all of us, our stories, our identities, our communities, the more we can empathize, the more we can connect, the more we can be inspired. So you all represent that really fully for me, and I'm really honored to have been part of your conversations on this space.
Ben, you almost took away the last thing I was going to ask you, but I'm going to ask you anyway. We always
Please do.
ask our guests, and Phil and I will do the same. But before we say goodbye, we'd love to have some final words from you, um, that might inspire, might guide us, lead us on to a better world.
I appreciate the opportunity. It is. I am absolutely a congenital optimist. I really am. It is getting hard out here for an optimist. There is absolutely no disputing that. And so the thing that I would say is, to me right now, it's about leaning into the things that give us joy, that give us happiness, right? The people, the stories, the works of art, all of it. But it's also about leaning into a reminder that we've always had the worst around us, and we've always had so many folks, communities, authors, artists, activists, podcast hosts, so many folks fighting for the best. And so that to me is what I just keep coming back to, and those are the stories I want to keep finding and telling, are the ones that don't shy away from the hardest, but that just inspire that continued reminder of our best as individuals, as communities, as a nation, as humans. And so I'm committed to that work in the classroom, in all my kinds of writing, in all the conversations I get to be part of. And I loved getting to share a little of that with a podcast that represents so much of our best here as well.
Thank you, Ben. We're really
Thank you,
glad
man.
to have you here. And We will be checking in with you and seeing you around, my dear Ben.
Please. I hope so. I hope we can keep the conversation going too.
Yes,
We need
absolutely.
to.
Us too. We're going to say goodbye because we're going to talk about you and how wonderful this is. Have a beautiful day. Thank you for joining us.
You both too.
Ben,
Thank you so much.
Ciao.
beyond, thank you so much. Good luck with everything. You will hear from us again. We need to talk to you.
Yes.
I'm with you. Whenever, wherever, please.
Thank you, brother. Wow. Wow. That was deep. That was deep. That's what we do here on The Vision is Possible, people. That's what we do.
That was stirring. That
Mm.
was I'm so glad that you dug that too, baby. I'm so glad. I knew you would. I knew that our audience would dig it too. All of you. Especially what we're going through. I'm going to do some final words. And then I'm going to come back to you. With all that we're going through right now, the disinformation that is being fed to us, the lack of information, the wanting to take away our history. We felt it was so important to have this wonderful Ben Railton on for him to discuss what he knows about history and what he is doing and talking about in terms of patriotism. And I want to invite all of us to do our own research, to not fall into the laziness of ignorance, to not only look to television or on social media for our history, for information about our country, our world, about our surroundings, about the other, meaning someone who does not look like you. I implore you to read. I implore you to Google search. I implore you to find out and stay informed, to not only use one news resource to listen to, but use several to not only talk to people who look like you, but talk to people who don't look like you, because knowledge is power. Knowledge gives you a strong foundation for you to really strengthen who you are. And right now, what we are up against, it really does come down to each one of us to enjoy learning, to enjoy discovering new things about others, because it all relates back to ourselves. Phew. That was a fantastic interview. I thank all of you for being here. And I'm telling you, you are the most important person to you in your life. I always say that. But you can only be the most important if you also are informed of others in the world, especially those who don't look like you. So you can know that all of us bleed red blood, all of us love our families, and all of us are valuable and important. Okay, I want to come back to my Philly before I bring him in for his final words. Hey, baby love.
Well, Iona's feeling it because it's here to be felt. Ben Railton is a gem. Ben Railton is a light. Ben Railton is a touchstone. Ben Railton is an incredible resource for all of us who do need the information that Iona's talking about, that do need perspective, a balance of facts and history that, yes, they're trying to take away, but listen, it done been lived already. You can't take it away. It's already in the books, baby. Whether it's in your book, in your library or not, it's in the good book. And that history cannot be rewritten, and it cannot be overwritten. And people like Ben Railton are here to remind us of that. What he also taught me tonight was be brave. Be brave in your exploration. Be brave in your search. If you're fearful of something, figure out why you are. Investigate it, see it, demystify it, release it from you, relieve yourself of that burden. You don't need to be fearful of anything, especially of other people. Be kind and carry that kindness with you through your life. Let that infect everything and everyone around you. Um, there's a lot of anger out there. I'm angry about certain things. Certainly, I is angry about certain things. That anger should only be there to help stoke your positivity, your resolve, your firmness, your love, your joy, your sharing, your caring. If you're angry and it continues to hurt you, you're using your anger in the wrong way. I don't think it's bad. I think anger is good. I think anger can motivate us and can push us into places that are much better for us than where we are actually living. As long as you don't let it consume you. The same with fear. Fear is difficult to deal with because that is irrational. So stay away from that fear. But if you are afraid, find out why. Ask yourself questions. Why am I afraid of this particular situation? And again, hit the pressure release valve and let it go so that you can come together in this amazing society that we have, this amazing human race that we're all running. And people like Brown Railton, it's their livelihood, it's their mission to help us be better, to help us understand the things that are difficult to understand, to help us reveal to ourselves the fleshy underbelly that we all have, that every society, every culture, every race, every creed, every religion has. So you can look that square in the face and do better and be better. You telling me we can't be better? You telling me you can't be better? I don't believe it. I have faith in you. I have faith in me. I have faith in we. And that's where I'm living. And I will use everything in my power to be a representation of what Ben was talking about today. And I suggest that you do the same because you know what? You'll feel amazing when you do that. Because when you're sitting around grumbling and bitching and moaning, it feels horrible. There's no answer there. You can get agreement. Oh, a whole lot of people, well, yeah. But be the one person that stands up and goes, wait, I think I have an answer for that. I think I have a way through. Be the answer, not the problem. The universe cannot abide a lie. So stand in concert and walk in concert with the universe, with your God, with your higher being, with your higher purpose. Find your way through. Be an answer, not a problem.
Well said, my darling. Well said. Hey, guys. This is where I know I brought you back in, Phil. Love it. This is where you can find Philly, the Phil Morris. This is where you can find me. And please, any questions about the show or any comments, please, you can send them my way. Let us know. Also, let us know any other people you would like to have on the show or topics. We'd love to hear from you. Again, here's Ben's information. Check him out, you guys. His writings are just terrific, and you see where his heart is. Here's where you can find the show. You see the email down there. I monitor that email constantly. Let us know what you're thinking about, you guys. Let us know what we can do to always bring you more terrific information. Hey, sweetheart, terrific show.
Brilliant. Thank you for having Ben.
Glad
Fabulous.
to see you. Absolutely. Love you all.
Thank you, everybody who joined. Thank you
Great
for your
week.
heart and your thoughts and your amazing comments. We love you.
Dearly. And Philly, like I always have to say, night, Philly. Bye, guys.
Night, Owen.
See you next
See
week.
you guys in a week.